Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Madison and Mountain View Thanksgiving week episode. So this morning we are talking about a topic that's really been high on the conversation list the past week, considering some of the news that's out about the Uber CEO and kind of his personality traits versus his business traits. So want to hand it over to Joe with some initial thoughts, but why are we rewarding, what we call arrogant jerks within Silicon Valley? And is it okay to have specific personality traits that we're rewarding with funding?
And that's the handoff.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to run with this one. So, Gina and I were co-founders, right, of Evolution. One of us is an arrogant jerk, and one is not. I'm the good cop. Gina's the bad cop. No. The thing is interesting because the article talks about that investors and some investors have no jerk policies, no jerk investor policies, where they've actually explicitly called out or drawn a line between investing in we're not talking about altruistic kind of self-righteous people, but we're talking about just people that are jerks or not jerks. I think it opens up this crazy debate because the Uber jerk, and pun is not intended, was Steve Jobs. I mean, he was a real son of a bitch. But he was just an absolute visionary and amazing guy, and he made everybody cry, and everybody feared him like God because he thought he was God. But at the same time, I mean, how many people that worked around him or worked for him at one point, I guess as long as they weren't fired by him, would have said, wow, what a life experience it was to work with him. So I think the whole debate comes down to this idea of there's leadership, which is one thing, and then there's this idea of, so what does it take to be an effective leader? So there's like a management leadership part of the argument, and then there's almost this idea of, and the question, of course, is, do you have to be an arrogant jerk to be a startup CEO? Which is, does it take a certain type of leader to be able to succeed as a startup founder? And I think a lot of it comes down to this idea of, in the startup world, I'm definitely kind of trying to straddle the fence here in terms of saying what I think or what I don't think. But I think, how many startups have been rejected so many times and are so used to being treated like jerks, and no is almost like the norm, and just that there needs to be this stubborn will, this determination, this almost kind of this reality distortion field that of course Steve Jobs made so famous in order to succeed. That's the good. The bad, I think, is this idea of absolute power corrupts absolutely, and this idea that when you get swept into this whole startup frenzy and you become successful, because I think that's the important point, does this kind of sense of hubris take over? I don't think anybody condones arrogance or condones hubris, but at the same time, you have to be really thick-skinned and tough and hunker down in order to succeed. I mean, I think of whether it's President Obama or President Bush, two guys that probably would do well not to read the newspaper every morning, and they don't. They are completely detached from the world because in order to be an effective leader or do their job, they've just got to be able to put their head down, even though it comes with repercussions. And I think, my final point, and then I'll just throw it over, I think, initially to Gina, because as my co-founder, but I think there's, just this final point is, this idea of perception is reality. How many times as a guy, for example, I'm sure Chris can identify, how many times have you kind of chased a girl and just viewed her as a snob or as just kind of arrogant in a sense, when the reality was, and of course vice versa, she was just incredibly shy. So it's like we see the world one way. We read what the press says. We read all these blogs. We see these CEOs on stage kind of trying to live up to a reputation or adopt a persona. Does it necessarily mean they are that person? Does it necessarily mean that we perceive them to be arrogant jerks, maybe because we're jealous, but are they in fact that person? So I thought I'd pepper in some just thoughts and throw it over, to you. And I must say, I'm kind of torn between this idea of, because the essence of this is, what does it take to be an effective leader of a startup? It's not just leadership, it's leadership of a startup. And if it does take being an arrogant jerk, then maybe that is kind of collateral damage in terms of what it takes to succeed. What do you think, Gina?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do.
All
I
right.
can.
Okay. So I do have more of a point on this one. I'm a little less balanced. I think, no, you shouldn't be a jerk. And I think it begs the question, how much farther could Apple and Steve Jobs have gone had he been nicer? So I think, sure, his determination and his stubbornness certainly drove the company as far as it did, because he had a vision and he wanted to see that vision come to life no matter what. But I don't think we can just say it got that far because he was a jerk.
He also almost killed the company.
Exactly. Might there have been better decisions that were made had he been nicer, had he kept smarter people around him who weren't so turned off by his attitude, who might have made better decisions for the company. So I actually think, I'll put a stake in the ground, and if I were an investor, and in a way we do invest in startups with our time and our resources and our brand introductions, and I like to try to find people who, will navigate this. As you say, Joe, it is really difficult and strenuous, and you get a lot of no's. I'd like to find people who persevere and navigate that with kind of grace and with an optimism that sees, the golden rule playing out: treat people how you want to be treated.
And there's also, sorry, were you?
No, go ahead.
Well, I was saying that, I've talked with a lot of investors, for example, and there's one in particular that I remember talking about a team that he invested in that I'd worked with a couple years ago, and he was like, yeah, I really love this team, and I know they're going to be successful because, like, the leader, he's just a bulldog. And that sort of came on to me. I was like, that is the perfect way of describing it. Like, he's not something that you get sort of annoyed by. He's just this extremely persistent, confident person. And it's when you cross over that line and you go into arrogance, I actually sometimes, and Joe, you actually alluded to this a little bit, and I think it's funny because I have many times described the startup process and specifically around investment and things like that, as dating. Right? You have to be confident but not arrogant. You have to be sort of persistent but not pushy. So it's much of the same dynamics, and that's just because we're people in every type of relationship that we have. And
I was going to say, I think we have a no-jerk policy. We don't have a no-jerk policy, but I think our experience has been, just being very candid, that we've struggled the most with startups that have had these. I don't want to go so far as to call them jerks, although I'm sure some of the other people in the company might. But these very strong personalities, this is how it's done, and who are you? And or maybe we've been very lucky in the sense that we've been fortunate enough to work with some incredible founders and CEOs, very humble, very open, very appreciative of the opportunity to be connected with brands. So it can work both ways, right? Which is the ones we've struggled with are the ones that are not, that are like, listen, the sun shines out of our arse and you'll do it our way, versus one which is much more of a partnership ethos. But I also just want to kind of let's put Steve Jobs aside, because he is an anomaly and an outlier, and let's rather talk about the article in question also talks about Twitter, and I think it was Twitter and Facebook and some of the biggest success stories in our time. What was the one recently? I think it was Snapchat, where basically where one of the founders' parents were involved in forcing one of the founders out, which is that there's been this like ruthlessness and this kind of cutthroat and this, actions that we don't necessarily want to instill in our children.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of values that you should, that will make you a better person and a better human being and a better leader and a better contributor to society. So, it's troubling that there are so many of it seems to be more of the norm than the exception. And maybe the flip side of that is there's a real opportunity to rise up and be a leader of a startup and say, no, we're going to do it this way. I want to say one more point, and then my only other point that I want to add, just to keep the controversial waters stirring. I could argue that a lot of brands are arrogant jerks, based on the way that they treat their agencies and they treat their startups. And we've all been there in terms of not attending meetings or being late to calls or leading people on, or just being a buyer in general, right? Which is saying, which is recognizing that they call all the shots because they have the budget. So I think it also swings both ways, and maybe it is the pendulum returning to normalcy, which is now the small Davids are going to say, listen, Goliath, we can play together, but you are going to get a couple of, stones from my slingshot in your crotch, and you're just going to have to get used to it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you brought up the brands, because I don't know, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, what's the consumer response? So we're talking about the investor response, but thinking about Uber last week and all these women deleting Uber off of their phone, where this is less of a power struggle kind of arrogance and more of just a social issues, or so brands, we vote with our wallets in terms of sustainability and different philosophies or values that a brand has. I don't think it hits mass market as much as we would like. Is the same thing going to happen to companies like Uber, where they have an unlikable CEO, but their product is so great that it might not make people stop using it?
Yeah, and I think that there has to be some really, really, if a founder or a CEO of a brand is just a terrible person, there has to be something super concrete that people can understand. And the example I think this was like 3-4 months ago. The CEO of I think they're a Canadian company that provides like food service to stadiums and such around North America, and they had that video that caught him in the elevator of his building, like kicking a dog that he was supposed to be taking care of, and he was fired within a week or so. And that's the type of behavior that it might be that if the CEO of Uber, there was that discussion that there's things said at dinners and such. If that had been on tape, it had been on video, perhaps the response would be different than just like, oh yeah, we're sorry, that was a bummer. There's something, we absorb different types of information very, very differently, and so when somebody just talks about it, in the press or online, we're like, oh, that's really terrible, and then we disassociate from it very quickly. Whereas when like, wow, that horrible human being is like, using this dog in an elevator, like, you need to be fired, otherwise the bad press.
We definitely have we have a no cruelty to animals policy instilled by our co-founder. I just wanted to actually just a thought what Lauren brought up, which I thought was interesting. I mean, I've always believed, actually, even as a CEO myself, even as an employee, that you have to like the people you work with and respect them personally as well as professionally. I think it's important you can't separate, you can't be wonderful, wonderful to people, but a son of but a bastard to your employees. Like, I think like the personal and professional respect really do go hand in hand. And I think that, certainly comments taken out of context we can give a pass to, but I think some of these like chauvinistic and misogynistic statements are just unacceptable behavior. I mean, clearly, I do think, though, the idea of, it's all very well to delete Uber and say, and I'm not going to use them anymore, but I'm not even sure that that's the right approach, though, in the sense because I think the point is valid. The product is great, and but I think you can choose not to do business with them and say, as a businessman or businesswoman, we're not going to partner with them or do deals with them. But as a consumer, it's a tough call, because honestly, if we held every single company, I mean, I run in a pair of Nikes, and Nike have had issues regarding sweatshops for how long? I mean, it's Apple and how my iPhone was assembled in China. And so I think it's a tough call as a consumer, because if we did really vote based on people's integrity and their business practices and their human practices, I have a feeling we probably wouldn't do business with anyone anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of a sad note to end on.
I know it is, right? It is, right? But I mean, look, we will continue to blaze a trail, Lauren, and be a company that tries to be the tide that floats all boats, right? Happy Thanksgiving.
Big hug.
Thankful for our team. All right. Well, we'll talk to everyone next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Dirk.